How's it going, everyone? It's Lee again from Function Dynamic, and in this video what we'll be doing is covering the many-to-many relationship inside databases and applications. Now, the many-to-many relationship is a little trickier, certainly more trickier than the one-to-many relationship, because it requires an intermediate step. At the same time, just like the one-to-many relationship, we often see it occur with many business processes. So let's jump over to the whiteboard and see how to implement this. So we see here, this is essentially what we are trying to achieve. So we have two different entities that we're trying to associate through a many-to-many. And cases of this could be, for example, an invoice having multiple products. So in this case, we would want our invoices to have certainly be able to sell more than one product at a time. And likewise, we would want the product to be able to be sold more than once. So we want the relationship to sort of work back and forth. This, as mentioned, is a relationship that gets a lot of beginners stuck because the answer is not exactly obvious. It's not hard, but it's not exactly obvious. And essentially what we need to do for this is to add an intermediate table in the middle. And we often call this a junction table. And this is a separate entity in your database or application that will essentially do at least one thing, and it will hold the IDs of the one entity and the other identity. It may also, in the case of line item, or in the case of line items, where we're connecting both the invoice and the products, it could hold other values such as quantity or discounts, etc. So what we'll do is we'll go over, so I'll zoom out, we'll head over here, and maybe this should be good right now. In the case of an invoice and a product, we of course want to link many invoices to many products, and we want it to work backwards as well. But as mentioned, we would need to do it through this intermediate table called line item. Now, in this case, we actually have a word for invoices to products. We know that they are called line items. In other cases, you might have other junction tables. Name it appropriately in those cases. Luckily, in this case, like I said, we do have the line item title for it. So what a line item does is essentially it's a record. Each of these will all have its own ID plus other fields. We won't really go over those because specifically what we want to do is just understand what to put in the line item field or line item entity. And at the very least, it must have two things. So it's going to have let's say invoice, and it's going to have product. And essentially what these are going to do is these are going to be lookups to the respective parent entities. So in this case, we'll have this is going to be linked to, oh, that's a terrible arrow. That's not much better, but you get the point. So the inventory field is going to be a lookup to the ID of the invoice record, whereas the product field is going to look up to the ID of the product that you're adding. Now, in the case of line items specifically, you might want to do other things like quantity and discount. As what is often the case, the link between the two is not all the information we need. In some cases, let's say we have books and authors. Authors might author many different books, and books might be authored by many different authors. In that case, a simple table with lookups to each is appropriate. Now, in other cases like line items, there are other properties such as quantity and discount, for example, that we might want to include. But the point being is having this intermediate junction table will give us the structure necessary to do so. Now, in terms of analytics and reporting, this structure allows us to run queries and reports on the data because we can now we can search which invoices had which products through proxy of the line items. So if you're doing SQL, we would join the line items to the invoice, and then we can join the line items to the products. And that would give us access to all the data from all three tables. And we can query specific fields from each there. Now that said, we can also, as we know, an invoice will also have a customer. And a customer, of course, will be linked to the invoice through a one-to-many relationship. So we have ID, and then we'll have customer on here. And through this, if we wanted to run some analytics or queries, we could, of course, through SQL, we can do an additional join. We could see which customer had which invoices. We could see the line items, and then we can from there see the products themselves. That said, there are some certain considerations in place. While this might work in SQL, and if you're doing some reports and have a lot of reports already in there, this is the way to structure it. But there are other cases that you might want to consider. In this case right now, this will be completely functional, and it is nicely denormalized data, so there's no data redundancy at this point. There is a term that I won't get into in too much depth in this video, but it's called denormalization, and it is essentially where we create a redundancy of data or IDs, and this could be useful in certain instances, and I'll show you one and why that might be important specifically to Zoho Creator. So as we can see, we have the lookup right here, and of course we can see that there's a relationship between customers and products through the invoices, line items, etc. But we might want to create a shortcut, and I'll explain why. So we can add in an additional field on the line item, and that which is essentially a shortcut. So instead of jumping through the invoice first, we directly jump to the line item and product. Of course, it's redundant because we already have the link right here, which then of course links through to product through line items. So you might ask why we would do that. And it's a good question. In short, there are two main reasons. One, which isn't really, in most cases, a big concern, and that's performance. When we're doing joins, sometimes joins, especially if data isn't modeled correctly or queries aren't written optimally, you can see that joins performance will take a hit, especially once you start dealing with large records. Now, in most cases, that's going to be more or less irrelevant. On the other hand, one consideration, one specific to Zoho Creator, and maybe for other platforms as well, is that Zoho Creator has a quirk, and I've explained this in one of my Zoho Creator basics videos, is that if you're doing reports from within inside Zoho Creator, so for background, Zoho Creator allows you to do reports and analysis without needing any SQL, which is great. But one quirk is that you cannot query data from tables more than one away. So for example, if I want to have a report of products per customer, if I did not have this, well, the customer is more than one table away from the line item entity itself. So we have the 1, 2. And as soon as we do that, we cannot access this data inside Zoho Creator. But by having this lookup, we can, of course, run reports off of this middle table, the line item table. And we have access to the invoices, we have invoices, or we have access to the products, and we have access to the customers. So we could run specific reports inside Zoho Creator using this structure right here. And of course, there is no limit to these intermediate, no limit to the lookups. So you could have a sales person, for example, etc. So this is, in short, essentially how you manage these relationships within a database and within an application. So we're going to head over to Zoho Creator in just a second to see how that's implemented. All right, so here we are back in Zoho Creator, and as you can see, I've put together just a very simple application. Taking a look at the entities, we can see that the invoice is attached to the customer. It's because I've went ahead and added the lookup on the invoice record itself. However, if we hover over the product and the line item, we can see that they're orphans in this application. So we'll head over to the designer. And we're mostly going to focus right now on the line items for this, because this is the junction table in this relationship. So we'll go over to the form builder, and we can see right now it's blank. The fields will add in, we'll just add in one for quantity. We'll add in, like I said, we could do a discount. Not really important for this, but the important ones are the lookups. So we'll add a lookup to the product, and we'll just say name. And the other thing is a lookup to the invoice. So we'll just say invoice number and push done. And essentially that's all we need to do to get the structure of the junction table. However, in Zoho Creator, we might want to use the subform field, which allows us to add different line items from the invoice record itself. That will require a few extra steps. And I'll jump over to the invoices right here. To essentially do that, we would go over to the advanced fields, drag and drop a subform, and we'll select line item from this. We don't want to select product because, again, we want to have different modifiers like the customer or the quantity. So definitely want to select line item right here. Upon pushing done, we can rename this line items. And then if we go back over to the schema builder for a second, we can see that, yeah, now they're all joined together. That said, however, we want to do two things. So as mentioned, we might want to add in the shortcut. So we want to associate this with this. And we'll also want to add in some bi-directional data syncing, and I'll explain that in just a second. So we go over to design. We'll start off with the easy one, which is the line items. Simply put, we would just go down to lookup, throw in another lookup, this time to the customer field, and we'll just throw a name. Now, the other one, which is the bidirectional data sync, is because if we go, well, if you remember, there is two lookups. We have the lookup to the line from the line item to the invoice itself, which is seen right here. And then there's one the other way around, which is through the subform itself. The steps, the easiest steps for setting up a bidirectional record sync is a little quirky. And what I'll do is I'll backtrack, because essentially what we want to do is first create the subform, and then on the form itself of the subform, we want to add the lookup. We've done it the other way around, so we'll delete this. And then we'll re-add in the invoice lookup, so invoice number. And then all of a sudden, since we already have that subform there, we can see this additional pop-up box that shows up, and we'll want to enable it and select the existing relationship. What this will do is, if, let's say, on the invoice record you delete a record, it's also going to delete the line item records. If we don't do this in this specific case, a deletion of the line item record on the invoice is just going to orphan line items. So it's going to leave line items in your database that aren't associated with an invoice. So we do not want that in this case. So we'll just push done. And essentially that's all you have to do. We can go back to the settings field, go to the schema builder, and we can now see that, yeah, the line item is now in the center. We have a shortcut from the customer to the product through the line item, which means that if we want to do reports to see, for example, which customers ordered which products, then we can run reports off of the line item field because we can capture both. One thing to note is that by adding this complexity or adding this shortcut, you'll also need to add in some scripts, either on submission or on addition of a row, to tie the customer that's on the invoice, the customer lookup that's on the invoice, to loop through and add it to each of the line items. But once you have that script in place, it is fairly straightforward, and it allows you a lot of flexibility to run reports. Whether you already have a Creator application, are looking to get started, or just want to have a one-on-one conversation to get pointed in the right direction, always feel free to reach out to us at Function Dynamic by going to www.functiondynamic.com. Click the Contact Us link and fill in the Get Started form. Once filled in, you will automatically receive an email with a link to schedule a time that works best for you.